Talk a little bit more about the power of story. I recently heard an interview where you talked about non-Western people have advantages in understanding what story is, therefore understanding what Jesus was all about, and therefore understanding what the gospel is.
Right.
In Western culture, we have sort of an obsession with categories and neat definitions, as we mentioned. Talk a little bit more about story and how that's different and possibly more powerful.
Yeah. So part of the failure of modernity is to try and take shortcuts that that really haven't been helpful. So we take shortcuts in propositional thinking, right? So if we can only do steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, things, but people don't relate to propositions. They don't relate to chopping the Bible up, for example, up in these verses and numbering them and everything. What they relate to is story. And since you mentioned, the Jesus, and let's talk about that for just a second. The Bible is 90% narrative. I mean, that should floor some people. And I used to say it was 75%, and then I was corrected by a couple of my colleagues who are Old Testament professors, and they said, no, it's 90% narrative, it's 90% story. And so all of a sudden it really hit me. If you don't understand story, you don't understand what's happening in all of these scriptures, right? Yeah. And so, and I deal with this part back in my book, Shalom and Community Creation, but it's like the Western world has beliefs, right? And so when they hear a story, they're looking for the facts. Like first question, did this really happen? Yeah. Secondly, what are the facts that I can draw out of this? And then, whereas indigenous people all over the world, when they talk about story, they're like, what's the truth of the story? No one really even asked, did this happen? It doesn't even matter. What matters is the person is telling the story. And that's another thing. The people who wrote these stories were more indigenous. They weren't Western, Enlightenment bound people. And so they weren't writing them. They never intended, the people who wrote these stories never intended them to be taken and picked apart and modularized and categorized in the way the West has done this. And we've ended up with this really perverted sense of Christianity and a really perverted sense of what the gospel really is. And so so who is more qualified? The first thing I'm going to do is understand, what has this person done to work on their own Western worldview? Because if they're still interpreting with that DNA, it's going to lead me somewhere different than where the writers intended. Mm-hmm. This is really important stuff because, whole religions have been built upon this. Not that Jesus came to start a religion. I don't believe he did. I think he came to start a movement. He was all about like, follow me, just wherever you're at and whatever you're doing. And we've made a religion out of it, but it's a weird religion because of the Western worldview and the binary thinking and the Platonic dualism and the extrinsic categorization and the hierarchies and the anthropocentrism, this human beings above nature, and all these weird things that came out of this Western worldview were never meant to be applied to these stories.